Hi, I'm here with Herb Baker, an alumni of NASA for several years. And welcome to Future Astronaut and uh, welcome to share your experiences and what your thoughts are on today's space program. Personally, I believe it's the second golden age of space right now because we're seeing so much activity. But I'll let you introduce yourself, and then we'll go through questions that either I have or the people watching have.
Okay, that sounds great. I'm happy to answer, or at least try to answer any question anyone has. Like you mentioned, I worked for NASA for 42 years. I just retired about 5 years ago, but I'm staying very much connected and active in space kind of activities. I spent most of my career at the Johnson Space Center, where I still live nearby there now, but I also worked at the Kennedy Space Center for about a year, and I spent 10 years in two separate tours at NASA headquarters in Washington, D.C., worked in on the original spacesuits back when I first
Mm.
started in the 70s, then worked in the space shuttle program, the space station program, the Orion program. The last 10 years or so of my career, I supported uh, flight operations. And so that meant working with the astronaut office and mission control of flight directors and um, the also supported the Safety and Mission Assurance Office and the aircraft operations. And I do need to point out that most people are maybe assuming that I was some people even ask if I was an astronaut. No, and in fact, I wasn't even a scientist or an engineer. I was a business guy.
Mm.
I contract management. So of course I got to work with those astronauts and scientists and engineers every day. And so again, I can't, I loved almost every minute of those 42 years. And one of the reasons I stay so connected, I'm currently spend most of my time, I'm on the board of directors of the NASA Alumni League,
Mhm.
and also do a lot of volunteering at Space Center Houston and for the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation and a few other. I'm the patron for MajorTim.space, a website that uh, promotes STEM education and a few others like that. So, and I just love doing interviews and speeches and talks and things like this, anything to get to talk about NASA and space.
And your time actually start predates 42 years, right? You work for NASA for 42 years,
Yes.
but 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 your time predates that involvement and being surrounded by NASA. Why don't you talk about how it was growing up and what life was like in that time frame? And I'll let you chat.
Yeah. So I was 12 years old and just happened to be living uh, again about 6 miles from where they opened what was then the Manned Spacecraft Center, which is now the Johnson Space Center. And so suddenly, by that time in 1964, they had the original seven Mercury astronauts and the second class of astronauts had been chosen and were working. And so all of those families moved into my community. And so suddenly, the children of those astronauts that were my age were my classmates and friends in middle school and then all through high school and college and still today. And so, I played seventh grade football with Frank Borman's son Fred and Scott Carpenter's son Jay. And again, all through the rest of middle school and high school, I'm really close friends with Gus Grissom's sons, Mark and Scott, and I could just go on a long list of, and so now even with especially with social media and all of the things I get to attend, I've become friends with a lot of the astronauts kids who I didn't even know back
Mhm.
then, because it's a it's now a big group, a big family. And so one of the coolest things I got to do, this was my first part of this was July 1969, Apollo 11. I got a job working for the TV networks covering the Apollo 11 mission. They would the TV networks, which were based in New York, of course, would send down crews from New York to Houston, and they would set up a mobile home, a trailer on site, and put a camera and a backdrop in and a microphone, and they would interview the astronauts and flight directors and such. And so my job, it was a non-professional job. There was no such thing as videotape or the internet. And so when they filmed an interview in Houston, that film had to be physically moved from Houston to New York so the networks could show it on TV. And so my main job was twice a day to drive that 100-mile round trip from Manned Spacecraft Center to the Intercontinental Airport and drop that film off to fly to New York. And I did lots of other miscellaneous jobs too. But again, that was my main job, going to the airport twice a day to drop off.
Courier.
And yeah, well, yeah. And so I actually ended up working for ABC and NBC and a Metro Media and a couple of others, because I ended up covering Apollo 11, 12, 13. I had gone to college during 14. I came back and covered 15 and a couple of the Skylab missions. And back then, again, this is 1969, and I'm 17 years old, and I had a job during the summer working at a service station. And notice I said service station, not gas station, because back then, when a car came up to get gas, and it was about 32 cents a gallon, if they wanted to fill up, we washed the windows, checked the air in the tires, checked the oil, even vacuumed the car out, if you can imagine that. And I got paid during the summer. I worked 10 hours a day, 7 days a week, 70 hours for $50. So that was 71 cents an hour. And so these TV networks were paying me $2.50 an hour. And I was like, oh my gosh, I am in heaven. And they rented me a new car, for the whole time I was there. So that was, wow, just what a way to start. But again, the funny thing, I'll finish the story. Science was not my best subject in school, and so when I went to college, I became a business major. And make a long story short, I ended up working at NASA anyway, and that's another long story. But and then my mother actually had a role in Skylab. You may know when Skylab was launched in 1973, there was a problem, and the micrometeoroid heat shield was ripped off, and the two solar arrays didn't deploy. They were stuck, and so they had to figure out a way to replace the heat shield. And so they came up with an idea. They called it a parasol. It was like an umbrella that was 22 feet by 24 feet, big piece of material, special material that was folded up and deployed through a scientific airlock and then unfurled and pulled down, and it worked. And my mother was the one sitting at the sewing machine that sewed that thing together. There's an official NASA photo of her that I see every once in a while. And so NASA's kind of been in my blood since
It has.
since I can remember it. And again, I can't imagine enjoying my life and career any more than I have. So I love to talk about it.
So tell me, tell me about your education, how you ended up at NASA as an employee, and that whole path, because we've interviewed folks that are trying to get through that path, that are working for some of the contractors for NASA. But why don't you talk about that path and how you navigated it?
Well, so unfortunately for anyone today, the path I took doesn't exist anymore. At least the exact one I took. So back in the mid 70s, to work for the federal government, you took an exam, a test, civil service exam. And so I just happened, I went to college at the University of Texas at Austin, and it just happened that the regional service center for like 5 states of the IRS is in Austin. not far from the campus. And so to help pay my way through school, I had a part-time job at the IRS in Austin. And so because I was there, in a government job, I heard about this test called the PACE, the Professional and Administrative Career Examination. There was these full-time employees were talking about it because that's the way that, of course, we were all there, already had jobs, although again, mine was I just worked temporarily there during the tax season. But if you already were there as a permanent employee and were in like a clerical job and wanted to get promoted to, again, an administrative professional job, you took this professional administrative career exam. And I remember them talking about how hard it was and that you took the test and you got 6 different scores in 6 different aptitudes or categories or skills, because when you took the test and if you did well enough, they wanted to know what job you were best suited for, right? So again, there's six different scores or categories that they rated you in. And I remember them saying, well, yeah, but it's really hard. And if you score below a 70, they just don't give you a score. I guess they don't want to embarrass you, right? And so I thought, well, at that point I was, I don't know, my senior year in college, and I didn't know what I was going to do. Again, I figured business major, business degree from University of Texas, I'll find a job. And so I decided to take the test. And so when you registered for the test with pen and paper, pencil and paper, you indicated on the form if you were given an offer of a job, which cities with government agencies you would be interested in working in. And of course, I put Houston because I lived there.
Mhm.
Without even thinking of NASA. That was the furthest thing from my mind. So I get the letter back with my score results, and I'm, at first I'm thinking, oh, this can't be me. They've confused me with somebody else.
Someone else took the test.
My 6 scores were 4 100s and 2 98s.
Hmm.
And so, again, I just shocked at that. And so all of a sudden I get a letter from NASA saying, hey, would you be interested in coming to interview for a job at the Johnson Space Center? And I'm, oh my gosh, are you kidding? Of course. How about tomorrow? It had never occurred to me that they had any jobs there other than astronauts and scientists and engineers and doctors. But it turns out that about a third of the workforce, especially now with social media and computers and IT and things like that, are business, human resources, or finance, so lots of jobs at NASA and NASA contractors that aren't, again, scientists, engineers, and astronauts. So anyway, and one last interesting bit of that is the guy who interviewed me. Again, I grew up down here. The guy who interviewed me was the father of one of my best friends in high school.
Hmm.
So I don't know if that helped or not, but it certainly didn't hurt. And so, 42 years later, like I said before, I couldn't imagine a career I enjoyed more.
That's cool. So you got hired, and so why don't you tell us about your 42 years at NASA, what you did over that period of time, what was your beginning job, and where you were at the end of your career there, and then it sounds like a storied career.
Well, and we don't really have time to hear everything I could tell you for 42 years. But so I'll try to keep it relatively short. Again, one of the first areas I worked in, again, it was basically managing contracts. I think most people don't realize that about 80% of NASA's budget goes to contractors. It's not for salary of employees or things like that. It's Lockheed and today's world, Lockheed and Boeing and SpaceX and
Mhm.
buying spacecraft and spacesuits and and engineering support and that kind of thing. And so one of the first offices I worked in contracts I got to work on was for the new spacesuits. This was 19. I started in 75. This is about 1978 after I'd rotated around several different offices. Um, they were developing new spacesuits for the upcoming space shuttle program, and so I think it was 1978. I started working on the EMU, extravehicular mobility unit, what they call the spacesuits contract, and my very first official NASA government travel, and still one of the first airplane flights I took was to Windsor Locks, Connecticut, to
Mm.
Hamilton Standard, where they were responsible. The contract was with Hamilton Standard to develop and design and provide the spacesuits. And so did that for a couple of years, and then they moved me to the Space Shuttle Orbiter procurement section, which meant we were literally buying the Space Shuttle Orbiter vehicles. In fact, I
Mhm.
still have. This was a gift given to me by Rockwell International, who NASA had the contract with to build the Space Shuttle Orbiter vehicles. And again, that was just the orbiter.
Mhm.
There was a separate contract for the main engines, and another separate contract for the external tank, and another separate contract for the solid rocket boosters. But I was part of the group that was buying the Space Shuttle Orbiter vehicles for about $2 billion each. And so did that from like 1979 to, I don't know, 82 or 83. Um, and so then just a couple of years after that, so for just a very short period, then I moved into another office uh, uh, dealing mainly with institutional kind of stuff. Uh, and then I was asked to go to NASA headquarters for a special assignment for 1 year. I was this was 1985. The job was Space Station User Cost Manager. And so it wasn't a, contract management procurement kind of job. It was basically an economic kind of thing. The idea, and again, this is 1985. This was like 13, 14 years before the first element was flown into space, and I actually started building it. And the idea was trying at that time to come up with a pricing system for knowing that there were going to be users wanting to use the space station for experiments and research and stuff, and coming up with some kind of system to price how much the NASA would charge, and obviously, just like with pricing anything else, you didn't want it to be too low so that there was too much demand, but you didn't want it to be too high so that there was too little demand. And so
Mhm.
so I actually got to work, believe it or not, with a couple of JPL folks
Mm.
who were, because they were computer specialists, and they were trying to come up with like a computer algorithm. And so like basically once a month, I flew from Washington D.C. to Pasadena, California, JPL, to meet with these two computer guys working at JPL. So that was a really interesting 1 year. In fact, I got to do other things. I got to write testimony for the uh, uh, the head of the space station program office there at NASA headquarters, and do some other, and that's where I met my wife too.
Mm.
So that was a really really good, my future wife, my
Mhm.
a really good time. And so I came back to Houston after that 1 year was over, and actually, interestingly, just the week before I left Washington D.C. was the Challenger accident
Mm.
in January of 1986. And so came back to Houston and was assigned to there wasn't much going on in the space shuttle program at the time. And so was assigned to the space station program. And so then because of the Challenger accident, and NASA decided to change its management structure and locations, the space station program office had originally been intended to be in Houston. And so I was assigned to work on a contract provide engineering support to the Space Station Program Office, which was going to be in Houston. After Challenger and some management changes, they decided to move the Space Station Program Office to Washington, D.C., just outside Washington, D.C., in Northern Virginia and Reston, Virginia. And so now all of a sudden, rather than being in Houston working on this space station support contract, it was going to be in Washington. And so they the big source evaluation board, where we would evaluate the proposals from the aerospace companies to be this space station support contractor, they decided to have the Kennedy Space Center host it. And so I spent a year at the Kennedy Space Center with people from all around the agency, selecting a contractor to provide this engineering support to the Space Station Program Office. And Grumman was competing with TRW. They were the only two companies that submitted proposals. And Grumman won the contract. And when, this is one of my favorite stories here now, when Grumman won the contract, they appointed Fred Hayes, the Apollo 13 lunar module pilot, who had retired from NASA and gone to work for Grumman, who had built the lunar modules. They appointed him as the new president of their Space Station Program Support Office. And so he and I, Fred and I, negotiated this 10-year, almost $1 billion Space Station Program Support contract. And he signed it for Grumman and I signed it for NASA. And so then I spent a couple of years there working with him, in his office once a week. And so we're, became friends and still friends today. And he lives, not far from the Johnson Space Center also. I see him pretty regularly. So getting to meet and work with and know and become friends with Fred Hayes is, one of the people ask me, what's the highlight of your career? Boy, that's got to be up there.
Up there.
Yeah. And so, gosh, let's see what happened then. After, so I spent another, 8 or 9 years there at NASA headquarters, and I hated the weather. I grew up in South Texas, and I remember there was a snowstorm one winter, and I thought, what am I doing here? And 6 months later, I was back in Houston, and I went into the space station program and spent a couple of years working on that, and then was moved over back to the space shuttle program. And actually, I was working in the space shuttle program during the Columbia accident, and got to work with the Columbia Accident Investigation Board to investigate all of that, and did that for a few years. And then I'm getting now to about the last 10 years of my career, and they moved me over to support, again, what was then mission operations. It's now called flight operations. And I remember thinking at first, I thought, oh my gosh, I've spent my entire career working, shuttle station. Oh, I forgot. I did spend, after leaving shuttle, I went to Orion for about 2 or 3 years before moving to flight ops. And I thought, wow, I've spent my entire career working in programs, shuttle program, station program, Orion program, this flight operations. I'm not sure how this is going to work, but boy, I ended up loving it. Again, getting to work, be the support of the astronaut office and the mission control operations and astronaut training and aircraft operations at Ellington Field, where nearby JSC, where we keep our aircraft. And oh my gosh, I dearly love that. And because of my history and experience and career, they gave me special access to mission control and the neutral buoyancy lab and the space vehicle mock-up facility there in Building 9, where they train for while they're on the ground. They use the NBL to train while they're doing spacewalks. And again, because I knew so much and knew so many stories and knew the history, they gave access to me to those places that they didn't even give to regular NASA employees. You generally you had to be working in flight operations to get special coding on your badge to be able to enter those places. And so they had me give tours, an author or somebody from NASA headquarters who hadn't seen those places, or any other number of things. And of course, also my own personal family and friends. If they needed someone to guide a tour, they would come to me. In fact, I even did that after I retired.
Mm.
And I was happy to do it. But so I love that. One time I remember I was standing there in the old historic Apollo mission control, which they basically closed off now and redone. And I, of course, I would get goosebumps every time I walked into that room, knowing the history. But I think I was there on a weekend showing some friends around, and the person said, wow, this is really nice. Thank you for taking your own time on a Saturday to come show us around. I said, there is nowhere on earth I would rather be than in this room right here with you today.
Mm.
So you're very welcome.
Mhm.
Anyway, so hopefully that gives you some idea of some of the things I got to do.
Wow. Yeah, Columbia, I remember being in Texas very, very
Yeah,
vividly.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Challenger was less of a is less because of my age, is less vivid. But
yeah, yeah,
Columbia, the local news stations were covering is streaking over
yeah,
Texas, and
yeah,
and they all cut away at nearly the same moment. And I stepped out on the back porch
yeah,
to see what was going on. So,
yeah.
um,
Well, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, no, that's okay. Go ahead and say what you're going
Well,
to say.
I was just going to say, yeah. So Challenger in Columbia, yeah. I was, Judy Resnick died in the Challenger accident, and I used to Webster's. You probably know Webster's a little town just down the road from Johnson Space Center, and on Saturday mornings, this was the early '80s. I used to be in an exercise class with Judy. We weren't friends, but I knew who she was,
Mm,
and I made a point every Saturday morning that I could go over to the exercise class.
mm,
And then Columbia, my wife was a teacher at a local private school, and Laurel Clark's son, Ian, was one of her students. And
mm,
so, yeah, it was definitely connections there. Those were, very, very difficult times. Well, and of course, Gus Grissom died in Apollo 1, and his two sons were two of my best friends in high
mhm,
school. And again, still today, I just saw Mark a couple of years ago.
mm. Um, so, what would you say to someone today that aspires to work for NASA or work in this industry?
So I would say, like you kind of touched on before, you do it, go for it. Boy, I, I, I can only speak for myself, but and lots of friends, but boy, there's such NASA and their contractors too. I think I never worked for a contractor, but I know lots of them and have talked with lots of them. There's just getting to work on something like space exploration, for the good of mankind.
Mhm,
There's just it's a wonderful feeling, and a great job again, at least at NASA. There was because I knew, unfortunately for them, a couple of people who were NASA employees and thought they found some greener pastures outside of NASA and took a different job. And boy, they ended up being really sorry
mm,
that they did, because it was, much more of a competitive backstabbing, everybody looking out for themselves, as opposed to NASA, which was, very much more collegial, and everybody would bend over backwards to help you, and no one's trying to claim credit for something that you did. And it was just such a wonderful place to work, and still is. People smart, intelligent, dedicated, hardworking, committed to the mission. And so anyway, as I mentioned earlier, there are lots of things you can do
mm,
for NASA and their contractors. Again, you certainly, and I'm a big supporter of STEM. A lot, again, most of the volunteering I do, and including the NASA Alumni League, our biggest goal is to support STEM education, and a lot of the other Space Center Houston and Astronaut Scholarship Foundation, STEM, STEM, STEM,
mhm,
and it's very important. But if that's not your thing, like it wasn't for me,
mhm.
again, there are plenty of jobs in business, finance, HR, IT, that if you really want to do it,
Media, as
go.
you were mentioning,
Yeah,
yeah,
social media. Oh my gosh,
yeah.
yes. There's plenty of things to do. So, and don't don't take no for an answer, or just it's okay to fail. Reminds me of stories. Clay Anderson, astronaut, is a good friend of mine, and you may know the story. He applied to be an astronaut 15 times
Wow.
before he was finally accepted. Now, the story's not quite as bad as it may sound, because he actually had a job at NASA. He wasn't an astronaut, but so, and that just blows my mind. Boy, I think even I, after 8 or 9 or 10 times, would say, okay, I give up. But he literally applied 15 times before he was selected. And so, and I hear lots, and especially for even today, young women, people think, well, engineering is for men, or space is for men, and they get ignored, or disrespected, or told that, well, this job's not really for you. Don't listen to them. you know uh, uh, like I said, if that's something you want, go for it. And again, don't take no for an answer.
Um, so why don't you tell us about what you're doing in your retirement? We hear you're very active even today, and so I'll let you speak about that, and then we'll talk about what the current space landscape looks like, and what your thoughts are there. So,
Okay, and so I mentioned a little bit of it. Well, and one thing I haven't mentioned that actually does keep me a little busy, not as busy as it did, but I'm a community theater actor too. I've been doing that since 1980. I've been in about 20 shows, acting mostly, but I've done I've done pretty much everything it's possible to do in community theater. And I'm on the board of directors for my local community theater. I've been an assistant director, an actor on stage. I've even played in an orchestra for Jesus Christ Superstar.
hmm,
I've done, uh, backstage, stage manager, lights, sound. I just love that. And again, with the pandemic, I haven't been on stage for 2 years now, and I miss that. But again, still active. Like I said, I'm on the board of directors for the theater. We just had a meeting last night.
hmm.
But mostly it's space, NASA stuff. I think I mentioned I'm on the board of directors of the NASA Alumni League. Um,
Why
and
don't you tell us what the National NASA Alumni League does? And
so you had to have worked for NASA. Unfortunately, for some people, it can't be a NASA contract. You actually had to have been a NASA employee. But if you worked I think at least 1 year for NASA and have retired, you're eligible to become a member. And again, so we collect dues, and that's pretty much our only way, and donations, pretty much our only way of collecting income. But we spend it, give it out to, we make donations to Space Center Houston to help the support they give to STEM education. We give money to school districts to support science and STEM education, and any other. They did there's the space shuttle motion simulator was being refurbished and kind of saved from the junkyard, and it is now in a museum, and we contributed to that. We contributed to the refurbishment of the Apollo Mission Control Center. And so just anything that supports, again, science, STEM education, and NASA, and historic things in general, we provide funding to. And like I said, I also, and not so much now with the pandemic, because I don't go out into the public as much, but was a regular volunteer at Space Center Houston. I'm still officially a volunteer there, but I'm not going over there much. Volunteer for the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation. I mentor one of the students that's selected for an astronaut scholarship every year. I've done that for about 3 years. I help when they have an event. Oh, this is one other cool thing. They had their annual Space Rendezvous event. It's about a 3 day weekend event in Houston a few years ago. And when, they have an astronaut signing session and lots of panels and a big dinner and social events. And they had a panel on Skylab. And because of I had covered them when I was in a young man and my mother's involvement, they asked me to moderate this panel with three Skylab astronauts or Skylab shuttle astronauts, Jack Lausma, Vance Brand, and Rusty Schweikert. And boy, the stories they told, that was one of the most fun things I've ever done. And I could, having to pinch myself, I'm up there on the stage with these astronauts, moderating this panel where they're telling these hilarious, wonderful stories. And like I said, I'm the patron for MajorTim.space. It's a website
Mhm.
uh, based in the UK that promotes STEM education from mostly for young children from like age 6 to 14 or so. There's an organization called Girl Start in Texas that I was volunteering for, and they promote STEM education for young girls.
Mhm.
And I loved doing that. I'm still involved with what they're doing remotely on that. They really haven't started doing that, those kind of things in person yet. So anyway, just lots and lots of volunteer activities, and uh, maybe I mentioned I really enjoy doing this kind of thing too, and I don't advertise or anything. I just I do have a pretty good social media presence because so many people throughout the world. I mean, not
Mhm.
just the U.S. throughout the world. It was kind of amazing to me to when I understood how literally all over the world people love NASA and want to
Mhm.
hear about it. In some countries, I don't even realize that they speak English, but you know, well, in fact, in one country, well, in Italy, there was a guy who wanted me to do a Q&A session, and he hired a translator. So I
Mm.
spent 2 hours. The Italian translator, they would asked the question in Italian, which I didn't understand. The translator would translate it to English. I would answer it in English, and of course, I had to, answer it in just, short bits so that the
Mhm.
translator could keep up. But I spent 2 hours, talking to a group of Italians that didn't even speak English, and
Mm.
so anyway, I really enjoy doing this. I don't think I've ever
Good.
turned anyone down. In fact, I have two more interviews, coming up in the next month or
Mhm.
so. And so anyway, I think to myself, boy, I didn't work this much when I was actually employed.
You did. You don't think you did, but you did.
Well, I guess maybe it's because I thought when I retired I would have all of this free time, and
Yeah.
I guess I do in the sense it's still free. I get to decide what I want to do, but boy, I
Mhm.
stay. I have to keep a calendar, you know, to keep track of all of the commitments I have.
Mm. Um, so let's talk about space today and where you see things going. NASA's kind of had an adjustment in how they're approaching a lot of their engineering projects. And what I'm thinking of is like commercial space. It's always been vendors or contractors that have built things, right?
Yeah,
To your
right.
point, you worked
Yep,
on the orbiter project
yep, yep.
and the spacesuits, but I think it used to be, and at least my understanding is NASA used to say, okay, this is exactly how we want it, and then um, then the companies would bid to produce that. Um,
Yeah,
versus today, not in every program, but today, I think even in the spacesuit program, I think the same company that you work with is bidding on the commercial space
yeah,
suit program, where they say, well, this is the capabilities, the end result of what we want.
yeah,
You tell us, you tell us how to do it and what it's going to cost.
yeah,
Um, and so it's a different concept. What's your thoughts on that? Because I've talked to both NASA officials that like that program, like that concept, and ones that do not.
I like it. It certainly, exactly what you described, allows us to take advantage of some of the ideas and thoughts and innovations of private industry. Like, SpaceX is a perfect example
Hmm.
to me. Rather than us saying, go build it exactly like this. And of course, I lived through that. And we decided to change something, or an engineer or something said, well, let's make this a little different. We had to go negotiate an agreement with the company and say, well, don't do it
Change your
exactly like
request.
this anymore. Yeah, do it like this instead. Okay, well, that's going to cost you. Okay. So anyway, as it turns out, believe it or not, I was involved, and this was 2005, 2006, with what they called the Commercial Orbital Transportation Services, COTS,
Hmm.
where NASA decided, hey, we're going to stop flying the shuttle in 5 years or so, and we're going to need a way to get to the space station, and we don't want to have to pay the Russians, which we did for years. Let's develop commercial capability so we can just buy, like a taxi service. We can buy rides from the ground to the space station for our astronauts. And of course, it ended up taking a lot longer than we thought. But I was part of the group in 2006 that awarded. It wasn't a contract. It was called a Space Act agreement to SpaceX and uh, another company called Rocket Plane Kistler, where
Hmm.
we gave them about $250 million each to go develop their own spacecraft. And exactly like you said, it says, we don't care what it looks like, you know, how to design it. You decide that. All we want to do is make sure it can carry our astronauts from Florida to the space station. And other than that, safely.
Hmm.
And other than that, knock yourself out. Go design whatever you want. And of course, all of the designs are different. Sierra Nevada didn't uh, get one of those COTS Space Act agreements, but as an example, their aircraft or spacecraft is like a little mini shuttle. It can
Hmm.
land on a runway. And so I love that one. And they're still working on it. And
Yeah.
I'm hoping in the next year or two that they have a successful development um, of the Sierra Nevada Dream Chaser, they call it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
That's coming up. I think they have to
yeah,
get their booster certified and flying, and then they should be headed to the space station, at least with cargo, kind of like how SpaceX started, right?
right, right. But yeah, that's a real advantage, being able to land on a runway.
Oh yes.
Um, yeah, but so as it turned out, so again, little did I know at the time what it would turn out to be today. But I'd never heard of SpaceX until
Hmm.
we awarded those Space Act agreements to SpaceX and Rocket Plane
And I
Kistler.
think Dream Chaser is going to be the second cargo vehicle that's going to be able to have significant down mass,
Oh,
right?
oh, yeah,
That's right now. Up until then, it was whatever you could get into the cargo area of the Soyuz, right?
yeah, right, right,
But
right.
now, and then SpaceX came along and provided down mass, and then
Yeah,
Dream Chaser is going to provide the same.
yeah,
And
yeah,
and they both have kind of the same concept. SpaceX was always eh, oriented towards human space flight, and
mhm,
so is Sierra Nevada. So that's
yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah.
gonna be
But I,
interesting.
I, I still say I saved the signature page from the June of 2006 that Elon Musk
Oh,
signed
did you?
to the yeah, and
Was
of course.
that's worth something money right now, I
Oh,
would
I don't
think.
know. I think at that time I knew this is kind of cool. And I do remember even back then, there was talk about how NASA's not happy about this, and or at least some NASA people aren't. And it's competition, and at least for most of us, couldn't have been the furthest thing from the truth. It was our idea, and we were
Mhm,
giving them money to go do this. We wanted them to do it, and
mhm,
today you're seeing why.
mhm.
And even with Blue Origin and things like that. Oh my goodness, I have a lot of astronaut friends, and Nicole Stott is one, and she just published a book, and she talks about, a lot of astronauts talk about the overview effect and the impact it has on you in appreciating and understanding the fragility and beauty of the earth, and we need to take care of it. And I still think I hear Nicole talk about, she was an astronaut for a while, and before she took her first flight, and saw pictures and videos, and her astronaut friends who had been just told her what it was like. She said nothing prepared her for what it was like to actually look out and see the earth, that beautiful blue marble with her own two eyes. It was like
Hmm.
there's nothing can prepare you for it. And so the more people, and William Shatner, he almost had tears in his eyes.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about William Shatner. I
Yeah,
think he did more to provide a public insight
yeah,
into that
yeah,
overview effect than
yes,
anyone,
yes,
because
absolutely.
because because despite what SpaceX has done a lot of launches to the
Yeah,
International Space Station. They also did the Inspiration 4th launch,
yeah,
but
yeah,
from a suborbital point of view, Blue Origin has gotten the publicity side of that
yeah,
right.
yeah,
Putting
right.
James,
Mhm.
putting very Michael Strahan
Yeah,
on a rocket, and occasionally he still talks about it on
yeah,
the morning show,
yeah.
and he featured it on with the NFL shows and things like that. Just going that
Yeah,
William Shatner and Michael Strahan, they have
yeah,
gotten the publicity side of it down a lot better, and of course. Inspiration 4 and all the
yeah.
good that it came out of it. St. Jude's
Thank
built
you.
an entire wing
Yeah,
into their hospital
yeah.
from the
That
funding
was
that they
amazing.
received.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I love that. And again, maybe not everyone doesn't agree, but the more we can do, the more companies getting people, and I don't, you can argue whether it's space or not, or whether you're an astronaut
Oh
or
yeah.
not. I don't really care about that. Just get as many people up there as we can to see the Earth from above. We're all going to be better off the more we can do that.
That's correct. That's correct. Um, so you talked a little bit about SpaceX. That has turned out to be i- i- quite quite the success. I'm not sure that you guys expected it to be as successful as it turned out to be.
Oh,
Um,
landing those rockets back that still blows my mind today. And
yeah.
we absolutely did not envision that back in 2006. That's incredible. And again,
Well,
a perfect
and the
example.
fact that we're launching people
Well, yeah,
on it
yeah,
on a
yeah,
I guess they call it refurbished
yeah,
booster, right?
yeah,
I don't
yeah,
think
yeah,
anyone could
yeah,
ever imagine that.
yeah,
And what I'm still a little surprised about is no one's been able to replicate it,
yeah.
which tells you, no one yet has been able to replicate it.
Hmm.
And the Chinese space program is
Yeah,
moving at light speed, and I'm sure they're trying,
yeah,
but they're not able to replicate
yeah,
that quite yet. Um,
yeah. The only thing that concerns me kind of in the back of my mind, and of course we talked earlier about Challenger and
mhm,
Columbia, and NASA, I think, was guilty a little bit of becoming complacent. And I'm kind of afraid. And thank goodness we've had all of the success we have had with the flights of the commercial companies, Blue Origin and SpaceX, and especially those that are flying people in space. You know, as they say, space is hard though, and it's dangerous. And I have to think at some point something's going to go wrong, and it's going to be a
mhm.
bad day. And I hope that day never comes. But boy, I kind of hold my breath every time any vehicle launches with people in it. And
Uh,
I just hope none of those companies become complacent and think, well, we got this now, because they don't.
well, and one of the things from my perspective, I look at it and say, um, I'm a little less worried about um, launching right now by SpaceX, but with what's gone on with the International Space Station, with
Yeah.
leaks and doing
I was reading
somersaults, and
today,
you know, is I don't know if you read the ASAP report that talked
yeah,
about
haven't read
that
that.
recently. Oh yeah, the ASAP just had a meeting where they talked about um, what's going on with the International Space
Mm,
Station, and I personally am a little concerned that may be where there may be a little bit of complacency.
mm,
Um, you know, n- you've now had, you now have a leak, which they believe
mm.
they've located, at least the cause of it. But you've
Yeah,
also had, um, you know, you've had a docked module suddenly think that it was
yeah.
not docked, and it needed to
Mhm,
do an emergency maneuver to get away from the station,
mhm.
and just
Yeah,
just
yeah,
just worrisome from my perspective about the mechanics of it. How much stress can the station take, and things along
yeah,
those lines from an engineering perspective. But
yeah,
um, let's see, what else do we have? Um, one of the things one of the things that we have is, like you said, Blue Origin, and what they're trying to do. I don't know if you've watched say their presentation on orbital reef. And so we have a lot of technology. Oh, you've not.
no,
That's
no,
that's their proposed commercial space station that hopefully they would like to see NASA move eventually to.
yeah, I know
And,
Axiom, a company that Mike Safradini, who was the ISS program manager for 10 years, is trying to develop his own space station,
mhm.
maybe using part of the ISS at some point if they decommission it. But yeah, I wasn't really familiar with the Blue Origin.
Yeah, Blue Origin's developed a concept with three or four other companies called
Mm,
Orbital Reef, which includes Sierra Nevada,
mm,
um, Boeing themselves, and one other company, which unfortunately it's escaping my mind right now. But they are doing that as well. And then you have Axiom,
mm,
which is focused on it. And I believe they're the ones that are actually planning to launch and attach modules to the International Space Station that
yeah,
separate in the future.
yeah, yeah. I think that's right. Yeah,
That's their concept is they'll attach new modules that later separate from the ISS.
yeah,
Um, uh, and then uh, one of the biggest concerns I have is the political landscape right now between the cooperation we've had in space and how
mm,
we've been able to
mm,
work in space,
mhm.
and whether or not that's going to be able to continue long term as well. So it's
Yeah.
not only the what's happened on the space station with kind of its frailty, but also the political frailty that may
Yeah,
be
yeah.
occurring that could disrupt the station as well.
Mhm.
Um, so, um, so now we're going back with Artemis. Tell me what your thoughts are on Artemis.
Yeah, so again, I'm excited for that. I actually spent a couple of years working in what was then and now canceled the Constellation
Hmm.
program. And when I was assigned to support the development, the office that was going to develop the new lunar lander. And so, we were having meetings and talking about this new lunar lander we were going to build. This was like 2008 or so, 2007 or 8, something like that. And so, I was heartbroken when they canceled the program. I mean, we still kind of have uh, SLS and Orion, the launch vehicle and the crew capsule
Hmm.
survived, but the lunar lander, at least that version of it, didn't. And so and I know a few of the Artemis 18
Hmm.
astronauts that have been selected that will be the next man and the first woman on the moon, and so that's kind of exciting to think. I mean, because I met and saw Neil Armstrong, and I'm friends with his two sons,
Mhm.
but didn't know him anything like a couple of the astronauts on the Artemis
Mhm.
cruise. It could, so have I can't say which ones I'm thinking of that I would hope get to be the first ones back on the moon, but that's really exciting to me.
Well, the space community has their favorites. I can tell you.
Well, yeah,
Uh,
well, and you probably, well, maybe you can imagine that they would never talk about the competition amongst that group,
mm,
to kind of like I just happened in the last few months to be reading about, it's one of the books I was reading about Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong and who's going to be get to be
first
the first
person.
step, and it was kind of tense there for a, a while, and yeah, I can imagine same kind of thing, coming up for Artemis. But anyway, yeah, that's really exciting. Again, to be going back to the moon. I'm glad we are. It's a stepping stone maybe to going to Mars and learning new things about living in space and maybe doing some mining of some materials
Mhm.
and building a habitat and the what is it the Elon Musk
Starship.
Starship, yeah, boy, looking at that thing, that's amazing.
Have you seen it?
So,
Have you
well, I
been?
pictures, I haven't seen it in
Oh,
person.
you haven't driven down to South Texas to
No,
take a
yeah,
peek.
yeah, I have a friend who drove down. Well, at least one friend who drove down to
Uh,
Boca Chica, but
yeah, well, the astronauts themselves about every other month take a T-38 down there and
yeah.
and buzz the place, and then go over, land at
Mm,
Brownsville, and rent a
mhm,
car and come over.
mhm.
But yeah,
Yeah, and from what I understand, you could the roads, it's kind of out in the middle of nowhere almost, and the roads you can almost just drive by, and it's not going to be like that probably for another for after a couple more years. I think it's going to get built up, and they're probably going to at some point maybe close some of those roads off. But anyway, yeah, no,
well,
I
they close them off for launches right now.
yeah.
So
Oh, okay, right. No, right.
so
You know when it's
the challenge that you have is
yeah.
at the end of the road is a state park.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
So
I didn't think
so
about that. Yeah.
there's a state park at the end of the road,
Uh-huh.
and
Yeah.
so and a lot of the locals go out and they get cleared out by the sheriff's department,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
during activities that are going on, but
Yeah.
it's a quite an endeavor. It's actually worth the drive. It's out of Houston. It's
Yeah.
not too bad of a drive. Drive down and spend the afternoon,
Good
and
one
then
day. Yeah. Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
you, yeah. And if
Yeah.
you
So
know
anyway,
people at SpaceX, you probably could finagle
yeah,
a tour
yeah,
of the place.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But so anyway, yeah. So I support Artemis 100%. I'm really excited. Looking forward to some successful launches, and yeah.
Cool.
Hope that all goes well.
Yeah. We got our fingers crossed for Artemis 1, which
Yeah.
is hopefully within the next few months,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then hopefully the whole Starship program and HLS
Mm,
program down there in Boca Chica will be able to move forward. There's a little bit of concern right now down there from an environmental perspective, and
mm,
they're working through that. But hopefully they'll be able to work that out. Otherwise, I'm assuming that whole operation will move to Florida
mm,
if it doesn't work out.
mm.
That's the underlying assumption.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, but it's been great to talk with you. Thank you for so much
Mm,
for speaking to us at Future Astronaut. And I've taken about an hour of your time, and I didn't want to take more than that. But thank you very much, and I appreciate everything you do on behalf of NASA, even
mm.
today, and everything you've done. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Lane. I appreciate the offer to come and chat, and I enjoyed it too. I hope you could tell I still love talking about NASA and space and doing interviews like this. So again, thanks for inviting me.
Okay, thank you. Bye bye.
All right, bye.